Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Trudy and Tina, Christine, Michelle, everybody who's been helping out on this. It's been really, I know, a lot of work, and I appreciate all of that, being able to sort of float in here and meet with you folks. The thing that I'd like to look at, I do believe that, and I've sort of updated this. There's probably 4 things I want to share with you, not 3, so get ready. But the main thing is I would love for you to come away with this with an altered concept of what we're here for. And I mean here for in the bigger sense of being educators in this world. And then I would also like to contribute then some practical strategies. And those who have put themselves in for further abuse and are in the 90-minute workshop session will go through that in more detail. But I'll just sort of give a high-picture version of that during this session. Okay. Now, to begin with, I would like you to think to yourselves of a experience that you've had that you felt was a really positive learning experience. It could be professionally, it could be in a hobby that you've got, it could be with your family, with your friends, it could be alone, doesn't matter. So given that scenario, I'd like you to think back and focus on this aspect of learning, this instance of learning. Could have been 20 years ago, could have been yesterday. Okay? So get that in your mind, and then let's just take a little tour of that. First of all, think about what your goals or motivations were in doing that. Why did you get into that experience, that specific time? What prompted you? Then consider, were there any tools or resources involved? There may have been, there may not. Maybe there was a tennis racket, or maybe there was a podium, or maybe there was a sporting field, or a musical instrument, or a chessboard, anything in the world. Were there any kind of resources or tools required? Then think about the context. Was it important where it took place? Could it have been anywhere in the world? Did it have to be in a specific place? With that, were there people connected to it that were essential? It may have been that you had students that were essential to that experience. It may have been that you had mentors. Perhaps you were working on a team. Okay? But how did people factor into that? And finally, I'd like you to think about your process, how you went from the beginning to the middle to the end. So did your goals perhaps even change? What you started out thinking you wanted to do maybe evolved. Perhaps you needed more resources. Maybe you tapped into extra people. Okay, so just think about that actual process. How did that go for you? Okay. Now just sort of bask in the reminiscence of that lovely time. Okay. All right. That would be a good thing for everybody to experience, and all of our students to have that positive experience. We're in the business, though, of having to scale that. And we need to get lots of people to have an experience like that. Right? And so we need to figure out ways to make that happen on a wider scale than rather idiosyncratic ways that it may have happened in each of our own experiences. Okay? So we can look at models for that. When you have to get a lot of things replicated, how are you going to go about that? Well, we've got one good model, and the 20th century model was actually very, very effective. Okay. This is an Oldsmobile. Okay. Took a few days to create. Already it was far beyond the handmade, custom-made kind of approach. But when we wanted to replicate and scale that up efficiently, there were a few things that had to be done. Okay. First of all, we needed standardized parts. Okay. So we couldn't have the different bits be made for that particular product. They all had to be to exact specifications. Right? Then it's just a matter of fitting things together. Also, when the materials are uniform, that makes it work more easily. But then also, sometimes when you think about big factories, specific machinery is created just to do that job. So there's new tools created that make it happen really quickly. Then Henry Ford came along and popped that on a moving assembly line, right? So that was his big contribution, is get that thing moving along, and then we know the pace and we can increase the efficiencies as we're doing that. And finally, just to make sure that's all happening pretty good, we need some oversight, whether it's a foreman on the floor or whether it's a quality assurance kind of people at the end, but something's got to make sure that that's actually working, right? And then we can feel confident that we've actually produced that good thing consistently. That revolutionized the world. Okay, so we went from that car, any car, previous years, to starting around 1911 to creating Model T, which transformed the world. Here's a bit of a video clip.
A car comes off the end of the line every 10 seconds.
Okay, every 10 seconds. That's a radical transformation. Okay? So it makes sense that schools that were also part of that rapid growth, we had the urbanization with people moving in, we had immigration, many people moving, so we had to scale up schools. So we couldn't do the little two-room school, one-room school, two-room schoolhouse anymore. We had to multiply that to accommodate these people. So we looked for the best model, and that was it. So what did we do? Okay? First of all, we standardized a curriculum. If we want all students to be learning certain things, we need to be explicit about that. Second, what were the available technologies? So things like textbooks and the teacher's expertise. Those are essentially the early technologies and the early resources that were there. Okay. Next, we developed schools. So rather than the one school or the small school where one teacher would teach, my eldest son went to a little two-room schoolhouse. So he had one teacher for kinder to year 3, and then 4, 5, 6 with another teacher. And those teachers wore many hats, and they were able to do the work. When you start to go times hundreds and thousands, you can't do that anymore. So we get grade levels, we get year groups, we get content areas, all that. All right, it makes sense. It makes it work. And finally, rather than having people self-manage a process, the teacher manages the process. So what we've done then is we've taken that learning experience that you may have had, and we've just trimmed back a little bit around the edges, okay? And we've got this incredible thing, the 20th century school. Okay. Now, there's a difference there, isn't there? And, my mom doesn't like it when I do this, I was, sort of raised well and everything, but sometimes I just have to utter the F word.
Schools are still pretty much organised on factory lines, ringing bells, separate facilities, specialised into separate subjects. We still educate children by batches. We put them through the system by age group. Why do we do that? Why is there this assumption that the most important thing kids have in common is how old they are? It's like the most important thing about them is their date of manufacture.
Okay, so that's one of Ken Robinson's talks. It's been animated through the RSA group. That's a good one to download if you don't have it already. But it's not a lot of fun for us as well as teachers. And what's happened now is that model, which did work, right? We went from 25% graduation rates in the early part of last century to 75%. Okay, so that did work. My point is that it's plateaued for quite a while now, and we're ready to do something different. This is metaphorical of, I think, a lot of anxiety that I know, I feel, and other teachers feel as well.
Oh, this is easier. Yeah, we can handle this okay.
I have to agree. I think we're fighting a losing game. So what we're trying to do is individualize, differentiate, all these things that focus on the personal learning, which is possible with the technologies within a 20th century structure. Okay? It's not going to work. Okay? 10 years from now, everybody will know that because we'll be somewhere else. Okay? It's amazing, though, however, how many people only think we make these changes within the context of that 20th century model. So my first job with you is to blow that up, okay? Yeah. So let's take a look a little bit. We've got the learning on one side, and we've got the school on the other. What's the missing bit? What's the part we trimmed off in order to scale? Okay, that part. Okay. My motivations, right? my tools, the places, the people that help me learn, my unique learning process. Isn't that true? When I'm defining the goals for you, you're no longer perfecting your French accent on a barge floating down the Seine. You're no longer, working at your level in playing tennis. You're working along with the other 30 kids in that classroom. Okay? So when we do that trimming off, what actually disappears is the human, the joy, and the meaning. And we wonder why students are perhaps apathetic, especially after they've been in systems for a long time. Now, this is where I ruffle feathers, because every single one of us knocks ourselves out to connect with our students, to make a contribution to them. So the last thing we want to hear is that we're in a sausage factory, okay? But you see, the whole problem is the sausage factory, not us. And so that's why we need to start changing it, okay? So, there's the truth, and then this is more like a Simpsons version of the truth. Like, duh, isn't this obvious? Okay, school equals learning? No, it doesn't. School is a construct that we made that was the best solution for teaching a whole bunch of kids at one time, when we had limited resources and it was one person who could deliver it to 30. That was efficient. We're now in a one-to-one learning environment. Okay? Not in schools, outside of schools. The kids are in a one-to-one learning environment. That is the default. They've got their phone, they've got their laptop, they've got their iPad, they're at home. And if we're not there yet, excuse me, it's only going to take 1 or 2 more years of stocking stuffers at Christmas and parents running through their iPhone plans before they pass them on to the kids. Okay, so this is one of those scenarios that's going to change overnight. If you haven't experienced that already, 2 years, once those plans change, it will be there. It'll be pervasive. So we need to get ready for it. So think of school not as learning. It's virtual learning. It's the best we could do with very limited resources. We can't we have a conversation like this, and when we start talking about how to improve things, it's always within the context of that model. Block schedules. Isn't it better to have 2 periods working with kids rather than 1? Well, yes, but that's still within that box. So we're going to look at some other ways to do it. So let's focus first. Learning is going to be the thing. All right, we acknowledge that school is there, and some people wouldn't even start with this as a premise, but I do. We need to have the kids congregate somewhere, okay? We can't have them out on the street. So we're going to take a look at that, and we're just going to skew that idea of school a little bit, so we're not thinking it's the same thing. All right, so learning is at the center, school is behind it. We've got a bunch of kids in one place, but we're going to change the model. And this is what I call next-year education. If you want to sort of see what the problem is, take the broadband access that you've got and take an iPad or a laptop and drop it into a classroom. Okay, that's where it doesn't work. Okay, so it's a disruptive technology in that scenario, whereas the one student motivated, self-initiated with that thing is going to do amazing things. So my premise is, let's go back and let's unpack the part that makes it not work. So with that, with this model, I'm holding on to those 4 key elements that hopefully you felt were significant and meaningful and inspirational when you were remembering a good learning experience. So that's part of it. But we need to tweak those a little bit. So with the goals, we'll go through these 4 pieces and highlight each of them. But the idea is that if we drop any one of them, I don't think it's going to work. I've tried to think about this a lot, and I've worked with a lot of schools, and many do some of these things but leave a piece off, and they wonder why it doesn't work. So let's take a look through them. Okay. Before we do that, just a really little short history in digital education, digital learning. I'm going to start with a 1994 video from the Digital Corporation, which doesn't exist anymore, interestingly. Okay. In 1994, this video was a promo they made for celebrating the World Wide Web.
From Georgia to Palo Alto, from Oslo to Singapore, from the Vatican Library to dinosaurs in Hawaii, from talk radio,
same-day service in a nanosecond world,
to missing children, from bioinformatics to the World Bank, from Wired magazine to Mother Jones. From current weather maps to the latest Supreme Court decisions, a vast array of information is being made available in attractive, easy-to-use form and for free over the internet.
Wow. Okay? I could just stop there and you'd leave like, this has been so meaningful. This has been so terrific. I'm so uplifted. How many of you were on the web in those days? Okay? How many of you weren't born yet? Okay? So, 15 years ago, right? That was going to be this new amazing thing. Within 2 years or something, it had done that, right? Static HTML, a few hyperlinks, a few images, right? Pretty soon we started doing many, many more interesting things. So let's just go forward a little bit to where we were a few years ago. You know, so rather than one size fits all in this new world, it's all fit to one size. It's the way we interact with the world. Some of you have seen this from a TED Talk.
Interact using natural gestures, both hands, etc. But the difference here is that you can use any surface. You can walk up to any surface, including your hand, if nothing else is available, and interact with this projected data. The device is completely portable and can be about whatever is in front of you. So we see Pranav here going into the supermarket, and he's shopping for some paper towels. And as he picks up a product, the system can recognize the product that he's picking up using either image recognition or marker technology and give him the green light or an orange light. He can ask for additional information. So this particular choice here is a particularly good choice given his personal criteria. So if he picks up a book in the bookstore, he can get the Amazon rating, gets projected right on the cover of the book. This is Juan's book, our previous speaker, which gets a great rating, by the way, at Amazon. And so Pranav turns the page of the book and can then see additional information about the book, reader comments, maybe sort of information by his favorite critic, etc. If he turns to a particular page, he finds an annotation by maybe an expert of a friend of ours that gives him a little bit of additional information about whatever is on that particular page. Reading the newspaper, it never has to be outdated. You can get video annotations of the events that you're reading about. You can get the latest sports scores, etc. This is a more controversial one. As you interact with someone at TED, maybe you can see a word cloud of the tags, the words that are associated with that person in their blog and personal web pages. In this case, the student is interested in cameras, etc. On your way to the airport, if you pick up your boarding pass, it can tell you that your flight is delayed, that the gate has changed, etc. And if you need to know what the current time is, it's as simple as drawing a watch on your arm. So that's where we're at so far.
Okay, so that's where we're at so far. That was a few years ago. Okay, so that's known as a sixth sense technology that MIT is producing. So some interesting things about that. You know, just the technology-wise, there's a webcam picking up the images and then a little projector there, just powered by a phone. So that technology is all there. They put it together. It costs about $350. So who doesn't think that's going to be around in a couple of years? It's already less than half the price, let's say, of our iPhones and things like that. Now, what to me then is powerful is just like the World Wide Web wasn't anything new in terms of content. It was a new platform. All that information existed, on people's hard drives or in magazines, newspapers, government websites and things. And the web just was a platform that allowed people to put it all together. Similarly, with the Sixth Sense, all that information exists. People's profiles, doing research at choice.com, finding out about products. All that stuff is out there floating around. It just is looking for a platform to bring it together and to make it location-based and person-based. So a couple things come up with that. You know, when the information of the world is available to me wherever I go and customized to me, isn't that sort of a good indicator that the game has changed and that the one-size-fits-all school 1 to 30 doesn't make sense anymore? Okay? Similarly, you know, we see that and we go, wow, just like it did with that 1994 video. You know, wow, okay. So we think that, and we always think like that's got to be the end point. But, you know, 1994 we were there, it became the Sixth Sense, right? So if we're at the Sixth Sense right now, where does that go? Okay. And that's in 15 years. Okay. So 15 years seems like a long time. What about our students? That's sort of their school time with us. So that is going to be one of those things to watch this space. Just like we didn't dream that the World Wide Web would be all of our music, all of our movies, our family photos, the web, all that stuff hovering around with us. Similarly, I can't, you know, imagine what the Sixth Sense will morph into, because it's not going to be just that at all. Right? So doesn't it just blow your mind and you start to think, you know what? The best thing we can do is to help people be good learners and totally effective and successful with who they are and what they've got. That's got to be the imperative. We've had sort of a different scenario. When I started sort of teaching, not in 1995, but earlier than that, but my classroom, I was an English teacher for 10 years, and my classroom had, I think it was 18 or 20 Apple IIe computers. Right? That was the first experience most students had using a computer. Right? And when the internet came along to the school, that was probably the first experience kids had with the internet. Where are we now? So we've gone sort of from an oasis of technology to islands of impoverishment. The school is the least technologically advanced place. And that's not because we're not trying awfully hard, okay? But when broadband, you know, in 3G and things gets that much better, faster, cheaper, and the kids are bringing it with their phones and connect to their laptops and have unfettered, unblocked access to websites, okay, it's a different scenario. So what is our job? And I'd like you to sort of carry this back. If this is resonating with you at all, let it sink in, and then go back to your schools, and take a look at this question, okay? Is our job propping up an aging system, 20th century school, or is it to promote learning? Because too often our jobs is the limitation of resources, the blocking of things, rather than the promoting of individual excellence. And it's not because that's not what we want, but the system doesn't encourage that. And so let's take a look at how we can change the system. Okay. So I'm going to flip through these. The first element is we need smart digital technologies. And I'm not talking about interactive whiteboards. I'm basically talking about data. Okay. Data is the moving assembly line of the 21st century. Data is the thing that will transform life as we know it. So just 3 really quick examples because we're going to run out of time. One is, as students progress through their learning, the software can track what competencies they've mastered so that we're not teaching the one-size-fits-all, but the students know these are the things I've mastered, these are the things I'm moving on to. That's a transparent record for everybody. Another one, wireless generation. Kinder students, year 1, 2, 3, when they're learning to read, they do their reading groups just like normal, but they input their information for that day on an iPad, on a laptop, on the computer. They go home, right? Wireless generation goes through their results, so the teacher comes in the next day, has different reading groups perhaps with students working on specific skills. That's where technology is helping us, right? So differentiation can help there, and that's a good thing. But we don't kill ourselves to do it. The data is there. We need to plug the data drain. Another one, this is an analytical tool that takes a look. These are NAPLAN writing scores for year 7 from real students, just names changed. And so the blue ones are kids who are sort of in the top band. The green is a nice chunk in the middle. And then there's 4 sort of below proficient kids down the bottom. So if I were a teacher in this class, I'd look at that and I'd say, right, well, yeah, I'm doing all right. 4 kids up the top, 4 kids down the bottom, and it's a really lovely bell-shaped curve. Okay, that's information. That's the kind of information we're used to. However, I can also look at that in terms of the actual criteria for that assessment, because that's easily tracked. So this software allows us to see where students have performed in each criteria of the NAPLAN. So we can see, like number 2 I've got labeled there. You see a lot of yellow, even some red, not too many blue. That's a trouble area. That's paragraphing. So now I'm a teacher, an English teacher. I say, right, if I'm going to do remediation, I'm going to focus on paragraphing. That, as a class teaching thing, that's going to bear the best results. And I'm not doing it because I'm teaching to the test. I'm doing it because to be a good writer, you have to think and write in paragraphs. Interestingly, as an English teacher, I know that after tests come out, and in my teaching day, we didn't have a My School, but if there's results up there, the usual response when you don't have information is to go back to basics. So, you know, the society, parents, politicians are saying, you know, well, they need to work on their spelling, don't they? And they need to work on their sentence structure and the punctuation. But if we look, they actually did those things very well. So we want to get away from just habit-driven teaching and learning and use the power of the data. Okay? So these systems are here right now, and that's why I'm showing them. That's where I say in five years' time, they'll be embedded. You know, think about Moodle. Think about you've got all that data there. All this terrific open source software is amazing, but you lose the data. So we need an enterprise system that captures and holds that data so we can do some analytics with it. That is just where we're at right now. But Web 3.0, the semantic web, the web of things where the software, I mean, Google is an example of this already. Its software, its algorithms, its searches get smarter the more we use it. So that's the Web 3.0 thing. Imagine then students traversing an online learning management system, their online learning space, and it's learning about their profile and people who learn like them. That's information that we want to have. So that's 5 years down the road. So the point that I make on that is 5 years, you know, it's a little bit fuzzy, right? Next year, the year after that, there's some imperative there. We feel that. 5 years, we sort of put it in the, well, there's other emergencies to get to. But I'll hit you with this. Technology will change much more rapidly than our school cultures, than our human organizations. So if people are tapping around saying, well, we don't have that software yet, okay, they need a nudge, because that system, that department, that grade level, that school culture isn't going to shift as quickly as that software, and they'll be using that software to do didactic 1 to 30 lesson plans rather than individualizing it. Okay, so what's next? Let's look at, I call it 2020 vision for 2 reasons. One, clarity, right? We're seeing clearly. And also, you know, 2020 is not very far away, but it is one of those markers where a lot happens in 10 years. Okay, so we want to project that far. So I love the Melbourne Declaration. Some people, you know, it gives us a goal for what we're really looking for. And it gives me firepower when people say, oh, well, you know, we need to raise our scores, or we need to teach to the HSC or, you know, VC or that kind of thing. I'll say, well, you know, Big Daddy says we need to do these things. Okay, so if your moral conscience isn't saying we need learners to develop their own capacity, to be self-initiated, to be creative, innovative, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, you know, if you don't want to jump up and down and sort of be the good cop, bad cop on that, just put it on the Melbourne Declaration, and that's our job. So it's up to us to make that happen. So we can take things like the Australian curriculum. I'm really looking forward to the keynote later this afternoon, because it gives us something that we can work with. Okay, it's not a recipe, it's not a prescription. It's just some hoops. One of my favorite poets, Robert Frost, said that writing poetry without rhyme or meter is like playing tennis without a net. Okay? We need constraints, right? So we need our outcomes, we need standards and things like that. But then we need to be creative about putting those together in meaningful experiences. This is Copenhagen, Denmark. It's a lovely little quaint country, you know. Hans Christian Andersen, all that cute stuff, right? Very sweet. But hang on, this is their kind of data of using technology in schools. The bottom line, 98% of teachers use ICT in the class. Okay. How did they get there? Well, interestingly, when we got to the 21st century, in 2000, their end of year 12 exam was on computer. Okay. I come from a state that, just has gotten going with calculators. Okay. This last year, they began having their exams with students with open access to the internet while they're doing their exam. Okay? Because it's an authentic examination where finding a right answer on a web page is not going to do them any good. They have to problem solve and create a solution given that time, and that actually is a very difficult, challenging thing, is to have the world's resources there and get this thing done within X amount of time. And what's even more radical than that, in this world of Australian curriculum, some of those exams cover two topic areas, history and English, let's say. Okay. Those are some of those walls I'm talking about, that are built in to the 20th century model that don't really make sense when we look from a learning perspective. So what is school's real product? Let's take a look.
Whoa, that's not good.
Oh, I don't need this. I'm already late.
Somebody will come. Anybody out there?
Do you have a phone?
No.
Kid would have a phone.
Sorry. Somebody! Hello? There are two people stuck on an escalator and we need help. Now, would somebody please do something?
I think that's a little bit like our students. Okay? We've put them in a box, encourage them to play by those rules, and then we give them technologies and expect them to do amazing things. Have you had that experience? You've given them an open-ended, cool project, they've got all these resources to do it, and they come up with really lame stuff, or, I don't have, or my battery's flat, or no. Okay? They've learned to play the game. Okay? They've acquired helplessness. Okay. So, what we need to do is to have a vision that really targets things that we value, that are meaningful. It may require us to be advocates within our communities, to get parent groups to see this, to join the P&F, and to plant some seeds so that parents are going to be motivated by what works with their students, right? And their students are going to be clamoring to do certain things. So tap into that, and then we just need to show, that it's working. So, what we now do, okay, so the goals, right, big picture stuff, that's going to get sent to us. The technologies will come, okay? So our jobs fall into the other categories: the context, the people, and the learning process. So first off, evidence-based pedagogies. Whoops. We do habit-based pedagogies, don't we? Okay. From the very first days, 1994, of using the internet, or the web, I should say, with Bernie Dodge at San Diego State University, we worked on the idea of the web quest because we knew chalk and talk, copy-paste masterpieces, and what I call the slacker's delight. This is the group project where one kid does all the work, okay? They make no sense in a World Wide Web environment, okay? And yet many just continue that way. I see so many research projects that are just copy-paste masterpieces. And yet, these are not evidence-based pedagogies. Everybody's jumping up and down and saying, oh, we need evidence-based pedagogies. And yet, for the most part, we're doing anything but. We're doing habit-based. We're used to it. We had those when we were students. We were taught with those, and we used those. So it's thinking outside that box. What about some of these things? Okay, during the next session, I'll be going through these in more detail because these two pieces are the two pieces that I think are sort of part of the model, the educator's way, the thing I call seek all. All of these things are possible, okay? The first one comes from self-determination theory, and again, I'll go in more detail, or you can go to the website and find stuff. There's a massive post on osline.com or tommarch.com for today's presentation. So intrinsic motivation theory or self-determination theory, the work by Harvard University Graduate School of Education on thinking, the David Perkins group and Ron Reichart. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi's flow theory, which has been around quite a few years. All of these are evidence-based. 20 and 30 years worth of university-level research across cultures, across genders, all of that stuff. You know, this is not just a clever idea that somebody wrote a book about. These are things that work. Okay? And Grit, Angela Duckworth, this is a newer thing. You can look her up on TED. This is what differentiates the most successful among successful people. So she assessed students at West Point, you know, like our SAS guys, and women. So the very elite who worked so hard to get there, what was the differentiator between those who came out after the 4 years at the very top versus, you know, the others that didn't? It wasn't IQ, it wasn't background, it was what she terms grit. Stick-to-itiveness, perseverance, those kinds of things. Does a system that moves students along, really regardless of their effort, promote grit? Of course not. And yet our system does that. Okay, we give them grades, but they're still moving along. Okay, and then positive psychology helps us with that. Okay, but if we take those items that actually work and we put it in the box of school, what happens? Well, they don't, because they're all about the me, my, meaning. Are we really willing to give up those good results simply to prop up a dying system? Not me, okay? All right, so the first thing we need are some new routines for the classroom. So not the chalk and talk, not the slacker's delight, okay? So this is what we'll go through in the 90-minute hands-on, but essentially we need something that everybody can do. That's why it's a pyramid, right? Everybody can do this. It's easy, both from a student standpoint and from a teacher standpoint. So we need a default activity. So let's replace chalk and talk with this. And we'll look at examples of each. But what it does, it moves its way up. So let's take a look at how that works a little bit. So the first one is this look to learn. Oops, sorry, we'll go through these. So basically what I've done is I've taken a strategy. You know, so those of you that know WebQuest, you know it wasn't anything new. It was taking pedagogies and arranging them in a way that provided a scaffolded set of activities or stages for both teachers to facilitate and students to learn. Right, and that's the whole thing that I guess I do, is I sort of package stuff that makes sense in a way that works in an actual classroom. So these good pedagogies, evidence-based, are built into each of these three main activity formats. Okay, so we'll take a look. And then ultimately what we're leading to is to have self-initiated, self-motivated learners, because that's the key in this era. Right? That has to be our goal. Every time I do one of these, I look in my email for that day and to see what funny thing is propping up the old system or something like this. So this was today in the ASCD Smart Briefs. The very first item, should proficiency-based learning replace seat time? What do you think, guys? Should it? This is a tough question. Should how well a kid does and knows things and can do things replace sitting in a classroom? Don't know, okay? We might have to table that one. Okay. All right, so here's an example of a look to learn activity. Rich resource, that's the thing. Okay, this case it's a video, and then a thinking prompt. And this is the work of David Perkins and the mob out of the Visible Thinking Group out of Harvard. So what the idea is, the rich stimulus changes all the time. But routines are good things because we repeat them until they become habits. Right? And that's why we use a lot of routines in schools. We have infinite number of routines in schools because we don't have to keep explaining it over again. There are systems, patterns, and rules and things like that. So what we want to do is we take advantage of routines. So we use thinking prompts. See, think, wonder is a common one. Think, pair, share, claim, support, question. So they've got a good handful and more of these. Those you keep repeating. And they don't get boring because the resource, the rich stimulus changes. Okay. So here's a little example. So that goes on for another couple minutes. Isn't that a clever way to use a phone? Okay, so they went around the two cities, 3,000 photographs, and then went back and stitched that together. Original music, makes a big impact. So we could look at that. What significant thing did you see? Okay. Remember, this is the you now. This is the me. We're looking for not right answers. We're looking for how did you connect to it? Okay. What did it make you think about? What does this make you wonder? So we're not stopping with a right answer. We're stopping without exploration and inquiry. So we use these look-to-learn activities to get a culture of inquiry, an appetite, what Perkins calls a disposition for thinking, an inclination to do it, and a willingness to do it, and a sensitivity to do it. You don't teach those things. You can't. How do you teach someone to be inclined to think critically? It has to come from the disposition, which he then says comes from the culture of the classroom. So doing this very regularly could be a daily activity. You, if you're the go-getters at your school, on the website, there's a website that I've created that has a bunch of these. Use those. Make up your own. Any viral video that comes along is going to be good for that, right? So what do you make of it? And then it could even be the same one if you're in secondary. The same stimulus could be used across KLAs or year groups on that day or for a few days, because it'll be looked at in different ways. You could look at this as a work of art. What if you change the music? How would that change things? So you can deconstruct what's there as well. I love, my favorite one is who, what, where, when, how, and why. Who made this? What were they thinking? Why? Just consistently. And then students run across something challenging or perplexing. Who did it? Why? Where? When? How? Okay, that's the little seed that we want to plant so that they can do that self-initiated thinking and learning while they're exploring life. Okay? So that's the look to learn activity. And again, there's a website for it. Go to osline.com or tomarch.com and go to today's post. You'll see a bunch of things. There's also links to the prompt. So literally, that's a copy-paste. How many people are versed with using a WYSIWYG editor, whether it's in Moodle or blog or a wiki? How many people? Okay, so you've got the skills right now, right? You paste in that embed code from the video. You can copy and paste. I've got probably a dozen or so of these thinking prompts. Boom, you're done. And then you can serve that out in your local school website and have teachers use it. So everybody does that, and we're just promoting, it's a 5-minute activity. It's a sponge activity that you do as you're shifting gears or, going from one thing to another. What's the drawback? Remember the pyramid? We don't stop there. It plateaus, it flattens out. Well, one thing is, if you feel like you've got to find them all, that's when you turn it over to the students. Let them bring in the rich resources, and then you can pick the ones that you think, are going to be useful for where they're at. So you turn it over to them, and if we're trying to build a culture, isn't that the way? Empower them to take it on. But those are they stop. Okay, so we want something that carries on longer, and this is what a class portal does. One of my favorite websites is a Child Slave Labor News Updates. Okay, I always show this. Reason being, if you did a search right now for child slave labor, this website is not only the top hit, but the top and second hit, through the miracles of Google. So imagine year 11 students who are contributing essays that they've written because their job in year 11 is to research and write an essay. Skills. The teacher is passionate about child slave labor, so she says, if you want to do one on this topic, I'll put it up on the website. They've been doing this for 10 years. Boom, there's the #1 hit in Google. Think about meaning. Think about those bits to what's left off. This is where we start to shift the game, and we use the technology to create real learning, right? Not virtual learning, not learning limited by what we can do in one square box of a classroom. So a class portal is a web space. It could be a wiki or a blog, and it has one topic that the teacher is passionate about, and social justice-y kinds of things are perfect for it, but it doesn't have to be that. It could be new, like Pixar cartoons. There's a lot to be taken from that. So think about the primary years. Who are the characters? What are the stereotypes being played with? How's the marketing going? What are they buying at McDonald's and it's in their Happy Meal? So looking at the whole big picture, that's what class portals do. It gives you the connections between learning and the dimensions of learning. getting outside the KLAs a little bit to see how things really match together. You visit this topic over time, like the child slave labor news. You don't do it all the time. Every term has ebbs and flows of time. You ignore it when you're flat out doing things and you've got a big project going. But when they've turned in that big project, or half the class has gone on an excursion, what do? When you've got some kids who are motoring right ahead, enrichment, extension. So that just ticks along in the background of your class so that it's there when it arises. Also, the real world jumps in. Another good topic would be the natural disasters. Right? When one happens, boom, there's a reason to go and take a look. How is it similar or different than the other last disasters? How did one country handle it versus another? What are the long-term ramifications? Does it have anything to do with global warming? All of those things are there. So we allow students then to develop mastery in what they're interested in. So, like Christine's video, if that's her thing, boom, she's doing that. And someone else maybe is the MC, and someone else is editing the music, and someone else is doing the research. And that's all good because those are extra, intrinsically motivated tasks. Okay? It's not the curriculum that says you have to do these things. It can happen outside of class time because students will be engaged. But imagine how we're now enriching that experience and giving them exercise in the habits of mind, the persistence, the deep learning, the things we talk about. But how does that happen when your unit starts and stops and then you shift on to another one and you don't really recycle back around again? Okay, so that's class portals, moving our way up. Okay? Then we go to WebQuest. WebQuest, a big difference is we're targeting specific learning outcome now. So we pitch students with a challenge that requires a response. Not a one right answer, but they have to present a creative solution or problem solving or an argument or a media campaign, something like that, that takes what they've learned and puts it into here's what we think, here's what we believe based upon what we've researched and done. So I would suggest you might do one of these sort of once a term or once a semester. And what it does is it provides the glue to stick many other things to, because it's the themes, it's the big ideas, and then you simply use that as a reference point as students learn more. But it's the problem-solving piece. Now, WebQuests have been around for a really long time, right? Sort of, we did WebQuests, now we tweet. I think we can fall in, as a professional group, we can fall into the chasing cool new things and still getting stuck in the box of the classroom. So I need that warning myself, and you may need that warning too, because it is cool to do the cool new things, but do it with the light of how does this change to go to one-to-one learning? Has it changed for students? Now, so I did a website called Best WebQuest where we reviewed over 2,000 WebQuests, and only 16.5 of those that were self-declared WebQuests actually were. The easiest litmus test for that is, could students copy and paste their way out of it? So, 83.5% they could. They're not WebQuests. Okay, you cannot copy and paste your way out of a WebQuest. All right. So maybe, we need to revisit it a little bit and think about WebQuest 2.0. Reason being, we've got a lot of information out there now, but we don't have the questions driving it. So the students are awash in information. So they need the question to drive the learning. We did WebQuest as a page because that's what we had. We had web pages, we had HTML. But really it's a process, and it always was. So you may do a WebQuest without having a WebQuest page because you might use a look-to-learn activity that gets kids hooked in. Then you might get them in a Digo group and collect resources and review those resources. Then you might have them working in an online collaborative writing platform like Stixie or something and having them share resources and create things. So it just is an unfolding. Okay, so it's a really nice match between sort of Web 2 tools and that process. Because if we don't do it right, if we don't implement it right, it's still not going to work. The first WebQuest I ever did, I got this email from a student, okay? And I had to think, geez, maybe the teacher who delivered that wasn't doing it exactly the way I would have done it, like as an unfolding, not here's a website, fill it in, you're done, and I'm going to grade it. Because there's something about remembering the box. It's about their goals, it's about their resources and their learning style, who they want to work with that makes it real. All right, so with that educator's way idea, we can push that back out again, and we can focus on the learner, and it's not an either or. A lot of people say, well, we have to do, the year 12 thing. Okay, I have a year 12 son right now. It's not an either or. There's always a false dichotomy. We don't have a control group of students who have done it the rich, relevant, real way and then done their year 12. We just have year 12, the way we've always done it. Imagine if we had those kids from kinder doing look to learns, thinking deeply, developing habits of mind. You don't think they would do better? I do. You got to think I do, right? No secret. So now we get to a student-managed process. And this is the piece that I think in some ways is the most radical. Okay? We're going to let the monkeys run the zoo. And this is where that idea of dropping an iPad into a lesson plan and it just turns into, World of Warcraft. Or did you know that the world plays 200 minutes of Angry Birds every day? Okay. So we need something where the students get off the escalator. So how do we do that? All right, so this is where I've got this thing called CECOL. And it's based on the research pedagogies that I listed there, but it builds it into a process. So it's an acronym for choice, effort, quality, attitude, and labor of love. And you notice that seek and then all has a divider there because CEQ is a process, 1, 2, 3. And then there's a reflection for attitude. Okay? So just probably the easiest way to get a handle on it, I know we're coming up on the end of our time, is to use a self-guided rubric. So this is one that I developed that we use with students. So the job then is, from a student standpoint, they need to make a choice. Okay? They could make lame choices, and they're still just playing school. I did it because my friends did. Okay? Or at the top end, the choice of what to do naturally flowed from previous experiences and long-standing interests. This is not a mark, but it's very clear who's doing the learning and who's owning the learning. So it turns the lights on for students as to what the real game is. And you shifted the goalpost on them to say the real game is not the mark at the end of it. The real game is how much you manage and own and are successful at your own learning. So the first bit is they have to make a choice. We do that by, like say a web quest would be an example, there are multiple pathways through. So when you've got a unit of work, you think about what are different pathways through this, different questions, or you know that there might be some students who the top performance they could do would be sort of at a knowledge acquisition level, and others who would be bored stiff at that level, and they're going to create a problem-solving approach to it. Okay, so to have that kind of flexibility built into your project. The next one is effort, right? It goes right over to the students. Their job is to put effort into this. How much effort? Their good effort. Immediately, we've differentiated. And I don't mean that flippantly. How can we think that we are going to differentiate a lesson for 25 kids or 150 kids if you're in secondary? Okay, that's Lucy on the assembly line going crazy. Okay. But every student, why can't they know where they're at, where their strengths are, and where they need to build? They do. We're just not inviting them, and we don't have that matrix behind to say, what are you still learning, what do you need to develop? So their job is to put effort in, then to pursue quality, because simply putting effort in is not going to be the big thing. But to say pursue quality can be, because we in this room would never leave if we had to define what quality is, right? It's an intangible. But can you recognize quality when you see your students do it? You've worked with a student for a while and you see they've written something that is a whole step forward for them, or they've finally gotten something. Okay, that's quality in every different KLA. So putting it to them to show us quality, and this is where we jump in the process and we help them. This is the best place to be. Working with students, they're not coming to you with a blank page and saying, I don't know what to do, what should I write? They've got their best effort there, and then you look at it and help them go that next step. And it works. All right, so that's 1, 2, 3. And then they check their attitude. All that research, the self-determination theory, flow theory, grit, habits of mind, authentic happiness, all of those things indicate that if we make a choice intrinsically, we put effort into it, and we pursue quality, get into a flow state, we will be having a great time. We will be intrinsically motivated, feel successful, etc. So if the attitude isn't positive and enthusiastic, something's gone wrong. They made a poor choice, didn't really care what they did, didn't put effort in, their best effort. If their friend put in the same effort, but this kid's more capable, this kid needs to put in more effort to feel stretched. Or they didn't pursue quality. So it comes back to them and say, well, just go back and work on the part that you didn't do. Because we want them to feel enthusiastic, lifelong learners, and that's the key. And then they are moving towards that idea of lifelong learning. I'm going to suggest that that is something we can get started with straight away. All right? Use that rubric and we'll go with it. Because the joy of learning, right? It's a shared human experience. We all have it. But what we can do is we can change that to the future of learning is an intentional human construct. What I mean by that, we had a construct. We are living in it and working in it right now. That's a construct. That's not, by definition, anything. It didn't exist over 100 years ago. So we can change it now. We can make it a new thing. And that's where I think we got 2020 vision, we've got smart digital resources, we've got new routines in the classroom, and we empower students to own their own learning. Those are 4 key pieces that are going to make that happen. Now, I'm going to give you a test. Okay? Well, we're going to learn a lot from this test, okay? You may have seen this test before, so if you have, we're all educators in this room, so you have to zip your lip or you're cheating, you're stealing someone else's learning, right? And you know you wouldn't be able to live with yourself through morning tea if you did that. Okay? So, here's your job. We have this woman on the right with the dark hair and the white shirt. Your job, and this is like a litmus test for where you really sit in getting this presentation I did or not, you need to count how many times she bounces the ball. Okay, ready? Go. Okay, how many say 5? 6? 7? A little PD wouldn't hurt, okay? 8? Yeah, see? 9? Overeager, okay? And how many saw the gorilla? How many saw it the first time? See, okay, good. Okay, so the first time, I didn't see it, of course. Right? We focus and we see what we're paying attention to. Okay? We're paying attention to school, curriculum, KLAs, year levels, nap plan. We don't see the bloody gorilla, which is one-to-one digital learning, which is there in our classroom, ready for us to do something with. Okay? Thanks very much.